Late breaking story as we were just talking here. Adam Schefter is reporting that the Commanders quarterback Jacoby Brissett is being added to the injury report. He's got hamstring tightness, and
Interesting.
they're going to list him as questionable for Sunday's game. And obviously, if he can't start, Howell would start. Howell is interesting. He's put up good numbers. He's got a good arm. He's
Yeah.
got mobility. I remember him in North Carolina having days where he ran for over 100 yards. So he's got mobility and arm strength. But man, he holds the ball a long time. He's taken 60 sacks this year. He's had some struggles as the year's gone on. What do you think? If you're a Niner fan, should you? I mean, Brissett's hardly a world beater. Should the Niner fans be rooting for Brissett to play, or would you rather? Is it an easier game against Howell or against Brissett?
I really don't think it matters all that much. This Commanders team, their offensive line is absolutely horrific. It is
And
so
hurt.
bad. And what the Commanders have had to do the last couple of weeks, but Jacoby Brissett, he's put up some good numbers. And when you look at the scoreboard, they've had some close losses, but they've been down big around halftime going into that second half. He's really had to lead them back. And they've had a couple of these fourth quarter flurries where they're able to put together a couple of touchdown drives. And I think that's a lot due to the fact that Jacoby Brissett is a really experienced player, but he's a backup for a reason. He's one of the top backups in the NFL, but he's failed to have really sustained success. But he is able to bring something to the table that Sam Howell isn't, and that's experience. That's the ability to be able to really dissect defenses, get the ball out in the right spot. He's pretty accurate. He has a solid arm. He's not the athlete that Sam Howell is. What really stood out to me earlier in the year, because that Washington offensive line was bad when Sam Howell was playing, I actually thought that Eric Bieniemy did a pretty good job of negating the opposition's pass rush, where he caught a lot of quick passes from Sam Howell out to those receivers. And they have a couple of really good weapons on that Commanders team that you were talking about that really stand out on tape as well. And for San Francisco's defensive line going up against this Commanders offensive line, if Howell does play, I think that's going to be a big part of the game plan with that bad Commanders offensive line getting the ball out quickly to negate that pass rush a little bit. And that's what the Commanders probably knowing that this 49ers team has really struggled to tackle in moments, and challenge them to tackle in open space by getting rid of the football quickly and trying to protect your quarterback.
What do you think about Ji'Ayir Brown? It's funny. It's like I saw knee sprain. I figured he's going to be out a couple weeks, but John Lynch has gone on the radio locally and said that it's a knee sprain. He says there's timelines on that, but those are just that, timelines. Jair's eager. He's young, so he's healing quickly. It's one of those things that's going to go right down to the wire. I know he wants to play. He's been out moving around. We'll see if he can make it. If not, Logan Ryan will fill in. We feel very confident that he'll do a really good, really good. He will do really good. A number of our injuries this week are going to be kind of going down to the wire. When he says that, he means, as far as game time decisions. I mean, the Niners love Ji'Ayir Brown. I mean, he's a high character guy. He's tough as hell. He can play in the box. He can play down the field. He can play coverage. He's got a huge future, and I'm sure he is healing fast. But what do you think? I mean, do you think Ji'Ayir Brown goes in this game, or do they go to Logan Ryan? And Logan Ryan, we're talking about an 11-year vet. He's only played 12 defensive snaps since he came aboard. He may have to assume a big role in this game against the Commanders if Brown can't go.
Yeah, I love Ji'Ayir Brown as well, and I think that the Niners should err on the side of caution here and not play him in this game, especially if that Rams game becomes really critical, with the Rams fighting for a playoff spot and potentially San Francisco really fighting for home field advantage in that number one seed in the NFC in that Week 18 matchup. You want to be able to have Ji'Ayir Brown against that Rams team or in the playoffs, because you're already really light at safety. You're without George Odom, biceps. You're without Talanoa Hufanga with that torn ACL. And Brown is a player who, one of the biggest compliments that you can give a young player when they have to come in for an all-pro in Talanoa Hufanga is when you're not really talking about them on the defensive side of the football. Because when you are sometimes in that secondary, that means that they're getting beat. That means that they're giving up plays and explosives, and they're not playing all that well. But Ji'Ayir Brown is a player who I really liked in the pre-draft process. Before coming to Chat Sports, I actually covered Penn State football. I know that James Franklin's game management is awful, and he can't beat Ohio State and Michigan, but Penn State has done one of the best jobs of recruiting, developing, and getting players who are really high-end pro players drafted really high. And Ji'Ayir Brown was excellent at Penn State, loved his versatility there. Before Penn State, he went to Lackawanna College, which is one of the best JUCO schools in the entire country. And when you look at his Pro Football Focus grades, he has passed with flying colors, 275 coverage snaps. So that's a pretty solid sample size right there. Overall grade of 78, a run defense grade of 77.5. So like you said, he can play in the box, in the slot, little hybrid linebacker and deep. And then he has a coverage grade of 74.5. And then he has 2 interceptions to his name as well. And I've always liked his instincts, his ability to kind of read and diagnose things, be in the right place at the right time, and make clutch plays. His passer rating when targeted is 98.5. So it's not all that good. But Ji'Ayir Brown has been a really, really good player. And I actually had him going to the Niners in a couple of my mock drafts on the 49ers report, because you kind of figured, okay, Deshaun Gibson, really good season, really good 2 years up until last week, in which he was penalized a lot. Still hasn't given up a touchdown in coverage this year. That's the best among all safeties. But look, he's older, and you needed to get another safety to pair alongside Hufanga. And if you have Hufanga and Ji'Ayir Brown, that's a really good safety tandem moving forward. And I just don't want to risk any further injury against a bad Commanders team.
Yeah, it's going to be, especially in a game that you probably should be able to win. But they're pretty thin. I mean, they lean on Taylor Hawkins, who's on the practice squad, but they got Logan Ryan and Isaiah Oliver are the 2 guys that they're going to be first up at safety, according to Steve Wilkes. How about the O-line? How concerned are you? I mean, Trent Williams, it sounds like, practiced yesterday. He's going to go. He's got a groin pull, though. He's not 100%. Jalen Moore, the swing tackle's got a concussion. So, I mean, they had to move some guys around. They lost Ilm Manning to waivers this week. I think Carolina might have grabbed him because they needed a tackle, and they had to re-sign Matt Pryor. And they had Ben Barch at left guard last week. I mean, really, outside of Jake Brendel, the entire line has been reshuffled. I would imagine it's going to be Trent at left tackle, Barch at left guard, because I think Banks with the turf toe will be out. Brendel will be at center, Feliciano at right guard, and McKivitz at right tackle with Burford on the bench. That's probably the configuration they go with. But last week they were forced to put Burford at right tackle, and coaches never like to say anything bad, but Chris Forster had to admit that he really struggled out there mightily. So, I mean, that to me was one of the main reasons why they didn't go back to Brock, is that Burford was just absolutely horrible at right tackle in the fourth quarter against the Ravens.
He was awful at right tackle, and he's been awful at right guard. I mean, let's call it like it is. He's been bad at right guard, and he's looked a little bit slow. So then you have to put him out at tackle, where you need a little bit more quickness, explosiveness, and speed, and he was terrible. And then you had to move Colton McKivitz, who has become accustomed to playing right tackle to left tackle, and Jadeveon Clowney was making him look like a little boy. I mean, he was eating his lunch. And I don't like to say disrespectful things about players sometimes, because I understand that it is really, really hard to play at the NFL level. But Burford and McKivitz were awful, and there's really no other way to put it. So I'm going to keep it a buck anytime I can keep it a buck. And, I said this week on my show as well, Larry. Like, my biggest concern coming out of the Ravens game, it's not that the Ravens may have figured out the Niners offense. It's not that Brock Purdy threw 4 picks. It's not the defense, which had trouble containing Lamar and gave up those 7 straight scoring drives. It is this offensive line, because when you look forward to the playoffs, you might have to take on a Cowboys team. Really good defensive line. You might have to play the Philadelphia Eagles. You might have to play the Detroit Lions. You might have to play the Rams with Aaron Donald and a couple of really good young players. And to the Rams' credit, they've drafted and developed really, really well, which has allowed them to kind of fast track this rebuild a little bit to the point where they're really scary. It's this offensive line. And this offensive line can be the lone reason why the 49ers did not fulfill their expectations and their potential of getting back to the Super Bowl or winning the Super Bowl. And this was the same issue last year. Against the Cowboys, their offensive line got manhandled. Against the Eagles, we know what happened. Their offensive line did not play well against a Philly team last year, which had 70 sacks. Now, the Eagles this year are not getting to the quarterback at the same rate, but they still have some really good players who kind of match up favorably against San Francisco. Now, to the Niners' credit, their offensive line played really, really well against the Eagles back in Week 13. And prior to Monday night, they had been playing a little bit better as far as protecting Brock Purdy and not giving up sacks. But you went up against a Ravens team, number 1 in sacks, that's very deep, has a lot of talent, and they owned you. And in the playoffs, in the Super Bowl, you might be going up against a defensive line like that or a team like that. And you look across the board at what happened with that Niners offensive line. This is part of the reason why Brock Purdy was kind of seeing ghosts and throwing some interceptions. He didn't feel confident back there, and he didn't have a lot of time to throw because the pockets were muddied. Colton McKivitz gave up 9 pressures and 2 sacks. Spencer Burford, 4 pressures and a sack. John Feliciano and Aaron Banks gave up 3 pressures. Jake Brendel and Trent Williams only gave up 1. That's good for 22 total pressures, 4 total sacks against Baltimore. And the previous high in 2023 for the Niners, 15 pressures given up against the Steelers in Week 1. So that's 7 more pressures than your previous high. So I am really, really concerned about this offensive line, and it's my biggest concern for this football team with the playoffs quickly on the horizon.